That is our proposal. I love you. I want to marry you.
No, I disagree.
Please reconsider.
I can't.
In the heart of Seoul, amidst the towering skyscrapers and neon lights that illuminated the city, there was a story unfolding, a story of love, betrayal, and revenge. This wasn't your typical love story, nor was it one that anyone expected. It was a tale of two people from different worlds, one rich beyond measure, the other humble and hardworking. And it all began on a fateful day when a billionaire's proposition would change their lives forever. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you believe powerful stories can change hearts, don't forget to subscribe. This journey is just beginning. Jinwoo, a 30-year-old black man working as a driver, was used to the luxury cars and high-profile clients that came with his job. He had been working for the prestigious Park family for 5 years now, driving the matriarch, the formidable 45-year-old billionaire Lee Hae-jin, around the city. Lee Hae-jin was a woman who commanded respect, her presence alone enough to make everyone take notice. Despite her wealth and status, she was a solitary figure, her personal life a mystery to those around her. Jinwoo had always admired her from afar, though he never dared to entertain any thoughts beyond his professional role. But one evening, everything changed. It was a late summer night when Lee Hae-jin, dressed in her signature black dress, approached him as he stood by the luxurious car. The usual confident air around her was replaced with something softer, something more vulnerable. "Jinwoo," she said, her voice low but steady, "I have a proposition for you." Jinwoo was taken aback, unsure of where this conversation was going. He had never been invited into such personal discussions with his employer before. "I will pay you $10 million if you marry me," she continued, her gaze intense, yet oddly warm. "I know this may sound strange, but I need someone I can trust, someone who won't use me for my money." Jinwoo's mind raced. He had always known that his employer was eccentric, but this was something entirely unexpected. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hae-jin smiled, a bittersweet expression crossing her face. "Because you're different. You don't look at me as if I'm just a billionaire. You see me for who I am, and that's rare." Jinwoo, flustered, didn't know how to respond. The offer was outrageous, and yet there was something about her sincerity that made him hesitate. He was tempted. $10 million could change his life forever. But there was more to the story than he realized. The revelation. A week later, Jinwoo was driving Hae-jin to a private dinner when fate intervened. The night had started like any other, Hae-jin sitting in the backseat, her cold demeanor masked by a veil of elegance. But something about the evening felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a tension Jinwoo couldn't shake. As they arrived at the restaurant, Jinwoo noticed a familiar face waiting outside. His heart skipped a beat. The woman standing by the entrance was none other than Mi-young, Hae-jin's daughter. Jinwoo had once been in love with Mi-young, and she had reciprocated his feelings until that fateful day. That was when everything changed. A year ago, Mi-young had broken his heart in the cruelest way possible. She had told him that she couldn't be with him because he was too poor, and that she was expected to marry someone of her own social standing. He had begged her to reconsider, but her mind was made up. Now, as he watched Mi-young greet her mother with a polite bow, Jinwoo felt his blood run cold. Was it possible? Could Hae-jin's daughter have anything to do with the offer she had made him? The pieces began to fall into place. As he stepped out of the car, Mi-young caught his eye. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Jinwoo could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She didn't seem as surprised to see him as he had expected. In fact, she almost seemed pleased. "Jinwoo," she said, her tone cool but friendly. "It's been a while." Jinwoo nodded, his throat tight. "Mi-young, I didn't know you were here." Mi-young's lips curled into a small smile. "I'm just here with my mother, catching up." Hae-jin, who had been standing silently behind them, finally spoke. "Jinwoo, this is my daughter, Mi-young. She's been away at university for a while." Jinwoo's heart sank. Mi-young was now standing next to the woman who had just offered him $10 million to marry her. The situation was becoming more complicated by the second. As the dinner continued, Jinwoo's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? He had loved Mi Young, and now he was face to face with her again, only to discover that the woman who had once broken his heart was now the daughter of the very billionaire who had proposed to him. The more he thought about it, the more he began to realize that there might be more to this than just an innocent proposal. The betrayal. The days that followed were a blur. Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He knew he had to find out more about Hae-jin's true intentions, and what better way than to speak with Mi Young herself. One evening, as he drove Hae-jin back from a business meeting, he couldn't help but ask, "Do you know where Mi Young is? I haven't seen her much lately." Hae-jin's eyes darkened for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "She's busy. She's engaged to someone now." Jinwoo's heart skipped a beat. Engaged? "Yes," Hae-jin said, her voice tight. "To a young man from a wealthy family. They'll be married soon." The words stung more than Jinwoo cared to admit. The woman he had once loved was now about to marry someone else. But there was something more to this revelation, something that gnawed at him. The next day, Jinwoo decided to pay Mi Young a visit. He had to know the truth. He found her in a lavish cafe, surrounded by friends and acquaintances, her eyes sparkling as she chatted animatedly. "Mi Young," he said, his voice low but steady. "Can we talk?" She looked up, her face a mixture of surprise and amusement. "Jinwoo, what's going on? You look troubled." "I need to know the truth," he said, his voice shaking. "About you and about your mother." Mi Young's face fell, and for the first time, Jinwoo saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "But I had to make a choice. My family, they never would have accepted us. I thought you would understand that." Jinwoo's anger flared, but he kept his composure. "You chose your family over me, and now your mother has made me an offer. She wants me to marry her. Is this some kind of game to you both?" Mi Young stood up, her face pale. "It's not a game. It's complicated, Jinwoo. You don't understand. You never did." Jinwoo's heart clenched. He had loved Mi Young with everything he had, and she had betrayed him in the worst way possible. But now, as he stood before her, he realized that the pain of her rejection was nothing compared to the new revelation that had dawned on him. He wasn't just fighting for her love anymore. He was fighting for revenge. And the woman who had offered him $10 million to marry her had just become the key to that revenge. Jinwoo spent the following days in a haze of conflicting emotions. The revelation that Mi Young, the woman he had once loved with all his heart, had betrayed him for wealth and status was a bitter pill to swallow. But what troubled him more was the proposition that Hae-jin, her mother, had made him. $10 million, marry her, all for a reason he couldn't quite understand, but he was determined to uncover. As the days went on, Jinwoo's frustration grew. He loved Mi Young, and yet she had rejected him for a man of her own social class. Her words haunted him. "You're too poor, Jinwoo. We could never be together." The sting of her rejection, combined with the knowledge that Hae-jin was using her wealth to manipulate him, ignited a fire within him. What better way to get back at Mi Young than to accept her mother's offer? Marrying Hae-jin, the woman who had betrayed him through her daughter, would be the perfect revenge. But there was more to it than just a simple marriage. There was something deeper, something more personal that Jinwoo needed to understand. He had never planned on marrying a woman like Hae-jin, especially not for revenge. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more the idea of getting back at Mi Young began to feel like a powerful necessity. Maybe he didn't just need to break Mi Young's heart, he needed to prove something to her. That he wasn't just some poor driver, that he could have everything she wanted and more, and he could take it without ever having to beg for her affection again. The acceptance. After spending sleepless nights weighing the consequences, Jinwoo finally made up his mind. One afternoon, as he drove Hae-jin to another gala event, he decided it was time to speak his truth. "Miss Lee," Jinwoo began, his voice calm but firm, "I've thought about your offer, and I've decided that I will marry you." Hae-jin didn't react immediately, her gaze distant as she stared out the window. For a moment, Jinwoo feared she hadn't heard him, but then she turned to him, her eyes unreadable. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. "Why would you agree to this? Are you in need of money? Jinwoo looked at her. I don't need money, but I have my reasons, and right now those reasons are enough. Hae-jin studied him for a long moment, then nodded, as though she had anticipated his answer. She didn't seem surprised, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Very well, but know this, Jinwoo, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this because it's what I think is right. Right for whom? He asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. Right for both of us, Hae-jin replied softly. I need you in my life, Jinwoo, and you need me too. Jinwoo didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, knowing that accepting Hae-jin's offer was just the first step in his quest for revenge. The wedding was set for a month later. Jinwoo could hardly believe that his life had come to this. A man who had once been heartbroken and rejected, now preparing to marry a woman who was older than him by 15 years. But it wasn't just any wedding. It was a wedding that would serve as the final act of revenge against the woman who had once discarded him for not having enough money. On the day of the ceremony, Jinwoo arrived at the lavish estate where the wedding was to take place. The house was a towering mansion, decorated in extravagant colors, with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and flowers draped all around. It looked like something out of a dream, a world that Jinwoo had never truly belonged to. As he stepped into the grand hall, he saw Hae-jin standing at the altar, dressed in a stunning white gown. She looked every bit the part of a queen, her regal beauty and poise drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. For a moment, Jinwoo forgot why he was there. In that instant, he felt the weight of the choice he had made. The woman standing before him was not just the object of his revenge, but a person with her own history, her own pain. And yet, despite his understanding, the anger simmering within him remained. The ceremony proceeded without incident, and before long, Jinwoo and Hae-jin were pronounced husband and wife. The guests cheered as they exchanged vows, but Jinwoo barely registered the applause. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the endgame. After the ceremony, as they walked together down the grand hallway, Jinwoo couldn't help but ask, "Are you happy now?" Hae-jin smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had won. It was a tired, almost melancholic expression. "I don't know, Jinwoo. I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to find peace." Her words took him by surprise. He had expected her to be more triumphant, more focused on her wealth and power. But this woman who had offered him $10 million and married him for reasons he still didn't fully understand, wasn't the person he had imagined. She was vulnerable. She was human. And in that moment, Jinwoo couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than he had first realized. 2 months after the wedding, everything came to a head. Mi-young, now married to her wealthy fiancé, came to visit her mother. Jinwoo wasn't expecting it, but there she was, standing in the doorway of the mansion. The last time they had seen each other, it was at the wedding, when she had turned her back on him for the last time. But now, there was no mistaking the discomfort in her eyes. The woman who had once rejected him now stood before him with nowhere to hide. Mi-young didn't look at him directly. Instead, she avoided his gaze, speaking only to her mother. "I didn't expect to see you married, mother," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and disdain. Hae-jin looked at her daughter, her face hardening. "You didn't expect much of me, Mi-young, but here we are." Jinwoo's presence was palpable in the room, though he didn't say a word. His very existence, the very fact that he was now Hae-jin's husband, seemed to unsettle Mi-young in a way he couldn't quite explain. The tension was thick in the air. But the biggest surprise came later that evening when Mi-young's husband, her new, wealthy husband, arrived at the mansion, clearly upset. He had come to find Mi-young, only to be confronted by the strange new reality that his wife's ex-lover was now her stepfather. Jinwoo watched, impassive, as the younger man's face twisted with shock. Mi-young's husband stood frozen for a moment, his gaze darting between the two, trying to comprehend what had just unfolded. The look of realization spread across his face as the truth hit him. Jinwoo, his wife's ex-boyfriend, was now his stepfather. Jinwoo had done it. He had avenged himself. But at what cost, and would revenge ever truly be enough? The days passed after the startling encounter with Mi-young and her husband. Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The tension between him and Mi Young's new life had only deepened. She had made her choice, and now he had made his. But the price for revenge was heavier than he had imagined. Mi Young's new husband, Junho, seemed to struggle with the reality of the situation. Every time they were in the same room, Jinwoo noticed the way he would glance nervously at him, as if trying to make sense of his role in this twisted narrative. To Mi Young's dismay, Junho's discomfort was palpable, and his attempts to assert dominance in his new marriage only made matters worse. One evening, after a particularly strained dinner, Mi Young finally confronted her mother. "You've gone too far, Mother," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I understand the arrangement, but why him? Why Jinwoo? I didn't expect you to marry him, let alone have him become my stepfather. It's humiliating. I'm not ready for this." Hae-jin, who had remained unusually quiet throughout their brief family reunion, placed her hand gently on Mi Young's. "I did what I thought was necessary. I needed someone I could trust, someone who wasn't blinded by my wealth. And I also needed you to understand something, that love isn't just about who has money and who doesn't. It's about who is willing to stand beside you when everything falls apart." Mi Young recoiled. "You don't understand, Mother. This isn't about love, it's about control. You've humiliated me, and now you want to rub it in my face that Jinwoo is the one who's won." Jinwoo, who had been standing silently by the doorway, felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't intended for things to get so messy. This wasn't what he had envisioned when he had first decided to marry Hae-jin for revenge. Now, he found himself in a position where the revenge no longer felt sweet, and the consequences were more painful than he had ever anticipated. "I never wanted to humiliate you, Mi Young," Hae-jin replied quietly. "But sometimes we have to make difficult choices, and sometimes those choices come at a price. I don't expect you to understand now, but one day you will." As the weeks passed, Jinwoo began to feel the weight of his decision more and more. He had married Hae-jin to get back at Mi Young, to show her that he wasn't the poor, discarded man she had once rejected. But now, in the quiet moments alone with his wife, he began to wonder whether he had made the right choice. He had seen a side of Hae-jin that he hadn't expected, vulnerable, kind, and genuine. One night, after another quiet dinner, Hae-jin sat beside Jinwoo on the balcony, looking out over the city's lights. For the first time in a long while, the tension between them seemed to melt away. "I know you didn't marry me for love, Jinwoo," she said softly, breaking the silence. "And I know why you did it, but I want you to know something. I'm not asking for your love. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just want you to know that I've always been alone, and I thought maybe having you by my side would make it easier." Jinwoo looked at her, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. "You don't need me, Hae-jin. You've always had everything. Money, power, respect. What could a man like me offer you?" Hae-jin smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Maybe nothing, but maybe that's what I need the most. A man who doesn't see me as just a billionaire. A man who can look past all of that and see me for who I truly am." Jinwoo swallowed, his own heart conflicted. He had come into this marriage with vengeance in mind, but now, in her presence, he began to wonder if the love he had once had for Mi Young was the only thing that had kept him from seeing the truth. Could he have been wrong all along? Could he have made a choice that he would later regret? It was then that the phone call came. Mi Young, no longer able to stand her mother's actions, had reached her breaking point. She called Jinwoo late one evening, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and anger. "I can't take it anymore," she said. "I know you're married to my mother now, but I can't just forget everything that happened. You were my first love, Jinwoo. I left you and I regret it every day. But I can't undo the past. You don't deserve this marriage, this life, this revenge." Jinwoo remained silent for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never expected Mi Young to come to him like this, apologetic, broken, and confused. But in that moment, he realized that even though she was asking for forgiveness, the truth had already been laid bare. The woman he had once loved had chosen money over him. She had chosen status and her family's expectations over her heart. "Mi Young," he said quietly, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I've learned something from this. Revenge doesn't bring peace, it just brings more pain." The words hung in the air between them. Mi Young's voice broke. What do you mean? I married your mother because I wanted revenge, Jinwoo confessed. But in the end, it wasn't her I was trying to hurt. It was you. And now I've hurt myself too. Mi Young didn't respond, and after a long pause, the call ended. Jinwoo sat there in silence, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The path of revenge had never led to the satisfaction he had hoped for. Instead, it had only deepened his pain and confusion. The final confrontation came when Mi Young returned to her mother's mansion once again, but this time, her demeanor had shifted. She was no longer the proud woman who had once cast him aside. She was a woman who had been humbled by life's choices, much like Jinwoo himself. Mi Young approached her mother, who was sitting in the grand living room, her expression weary. I can't do this anymore, she said softly. I can't be part of this game. I'm sorry for everything. I've hurt everyone. Hae-jin looked at her daughter with a mix of sadness and acceptance. You're right, Mi Young, but now we all have to make peace with the choices we've made. Jinwoo stood at the doorway, watching the scene unfold before him. In that moment, he realized that the battle for revenge was over. It had never been about winning. It had always been about finding peace, and that was something he and Mi Young would have to find on their own. As the years passed, Jinwoo and Hae-jin continued their marriage, though it was no longer about revenge or money. It was about understanding, about forgiveness, and about living a life together in the shadow of their past choices. Mi Young, after much reflection, found her own path, though it was different from what she had once imagined. And in the end, all three of them had learned the same lesson. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is not in destroying the one who wronged you, but in finding the strength to let go. Years later, time had a way of healing, or at least, masking the wounds that had once seemed impossible to overcome. It had been 5 years since Jinwoo had married Hae-jin, and 3 years since Mi Young had left her mother's home to start a new life. The events of the past, full of betrayal, vengeance, and unspoken love, had faded into the past, but their impact was still alive in the choices the characters made every day. Jinwoo's journey. Jinwoo had changed. The fire of revenge that had once burned so intensely inside him had cooled, replaced by a deep sense of responsibility and understanding. His marriage to Hae-jin, which had started as a calculated move to hurt Mi Young, had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Though they had both entered it with guarded hearts, they had found an unlikely companionship, one that over time became rooted in mutual respect. After the initial turbulence, they had found peace, but it hadn't been without effort. Jinwoo had slowly become the man Hae-jin could lean on, not because of his wealth, but because of his integrity. And in turn, Hae-jin, once cold and distant, had softened, offering Jinwoo a level of trust he hadn't thought possible. They had started a small family. Jinwoo often found himself laughing at the irony of it all. The man who had once been humiliated and tossed aside by love now had a family of his own. His life was no longer just about survival or vengeance, it was about being present, and he was beginning to understand what true happiness felt like. But there were still moments when he felt the pull of the past. Late at night, after Hae-jin had gone to bed, Jinwoo would stand by the window, looking out over the Seoul skyline. He would think of Mi Young, how she had once been the love of his life, and how things had spiraled out of control. There were times he wondered what might have happened had he not accepted Hae-jin's proposal. Would Mi Young have come back to him, or had they both been destined to part ways forever? Yet in those quiet moments, Jinwoo realized that he no longer needed answers. The past was the past, and it was time to look forward. His relationship with Hae-jin, though unconventional, was built on a foundation that was solid now. He no longer lived in the shadow of revenge. Hae-jin's transformation. For Hae-jin, the years had been a journey of self-discovery. After years of living a life dictated by wealth, expectations, and loneliness, she had come to realize that her success had come at the cost of meaningful connections. Marrying Jinwoo had been her first real attempt at stepping out of her world of isolation. She had chosen him because he wasn't after her money, but it was more than that. He had become her anchor. Hae-jin had always been the one in control, the matriarch of a vast empire, the woman who held everything together. But in her marriage to Jinwoo, she she had found a kind of vulnerability she had never known. It was a vulnerability that allowed her to open up and share the parts of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The woman who had once offered a man money to marry her for the sake of companionship had become someone who truly understood the value of love, loyalty, and trust. Jinwoo had taught her that life wasn't just about building empires. It was about building relationships that were genuine and lasting. And in return, Hae-jin had helped Jinwoo find his place in the world, giving him the space to grow into the man he was meant to be. Despite their past, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. They weren't just husband and wife, they were partners in the truest sense. Mi-young's new path. Mi-young, meanwhile, had taken a different path. After the fallout with her mother and Jinwoo, she had left Seoul to study abroad, seeking solace in a new country. For years, she had been haunted by the choices she had made, the decision to reject Jinwoo and marry for status. But she also realized something important. Her actions had been a reflection of her own insecurities, not the true love she had once shared with Jinwoo. Mi-young had thrown herself into her studies, eventually becoming a successful businesswoman in her own right. Her time abroad had given her the space to reflect on her mistakes, and with time, she began to heal. But it wasn't until one fateful day that Mi-young truly began to understand the depth of her regret. It was a few years after Jinwoo had married Hae-jin when Mi-young finally returned to Seoul. Her mother had tried to reach out to her, but Mi-young had kept her distance. She had lived a life filled with success, but it felt empty. She was still haunted by the feeling that something or someone was missing. One day, Mi-young found herself standing in front of Hae-jin's mansion, unsure of what had brought her there. She had never truly apologized to Jinwoo or her mother for the hurt she had caused them, and now, after all this time, it seemed like the only way to find peace was to confront her past. She rang the doorbell, her heart racing. A few moments later, the door opened, and there stood Jinwoo. He looked different, older, perhaps more at ease with himself. Mi-young. Jinwoo's voice was soft, as if he hadn't expected to see her. I need to talk, Mi-young said, her voice shaky. I owe you both an apology. Jinwoo studied her for a long moment, the silence hanging in the air between them. He had been through so much, and yet, standing here now, he realized that he wasn't the same man who had once been torn apart by her rejection. He was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, at peace. Come in, Jinwoo finally said, stepping aside to let her in. Inside, Mi-young sat down across from Jinwoo and Hae-jin, the air thick with unspoken words. After a long pause, Mi-young finally spoke. I was wrong, she said, her voice filled with regret. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I had to choose wealth, status, and security, but in the process I lost sight of what really mattered. I lost you, Jinwoo, and I lost myself. Hae-jin, who had been quietly watching, placed a hand on her daughter's. We all make mistakes, Mi-young. The important thing is to learn from them. Jinwoo nodded, his gaze steady. I've had my own share of regrets. I don't know if we can go back to what we once had, but what I've learned is that sometimes letting go is the only way forward. Mi-young looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know how sorry I am. Jinwoo smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't always about saying the words. It's about understanding why things happened the way they did and moving forward with an open heart. The future. As time passed, Mi-young found her own peace. She had made amends with the past, and while she and Jinwoo could never go back to what they once had, they could both move forward. Mi-young began to focus on her career, and though her path was different, it was hers to walk. Jinwoo and Hae-jin, now firmly rooted in their love for each other, continued to build a life together, one not defined by wealth, status, or revenge, but by mutual respect, understanding, and most importantly, love. The past had shaped them all, but it no longer controlled their futures. And as they all moved forward, they knew that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in getting what you wanted, it was in finding peace, letting go of old hurts, and starting fresh.